Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to today's ISESA's webinar session. Just before we begin today's webinar, I'd like to remind you all about our fantastic ISESA conference that is taking place on the 22nd and 23rd of May on the SETU campus. It is a jammed-packed program with excellent keynote speakers, lots of really good research activities, and the social program looks very impressive as well. I've booked my ticket and I hope you do so after today's webinar. Talking about being on the SETU campus, I'm very happy to introduce our distinguished speaker today, Professor Michael Harrison, who is the head of the Department of Sport and Exercise Science. Professor Harrison brings a wealth of experience, particularly in the role of exercise for clinical populations. Alongside his academic work, he has been absolutely instrumental in developing community-based exercise services for people living with chronic conditions and shaping national frameworks to support the professionalisation of exercise delivery in healthcare context, which he's going to talk about today. We are absolutely delighted to have Michael to share his insights. Before I hand over to Michael, a quick reminder that you can submit your questions via the Q&A box. So please join me in welcoming Professor Michael Harrison for today's webinar. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Carla, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'm absolutely delighted to be able to present to you today about 12 to 18 months work on the development of our competency, qualification and accreditation framework for long-term condition exercise instructors. I apologize if you've heard elements of this presentation before. It has been delivered in a number of settings over the last 6 months since it was launched. But I will try and put a spin on it today that makes it relevant, particularly relevant to the exercise science community. So this national framework, and it is a national framework, was developed by myself, Dr. Brona Keogh and Dr. Claire Lodge, all of us who work in SETU, myself and Brona on the Waterford campus and Claire on the Carlow campus. And in case I forget at the end of the presentation, I would like to acknowledge that Brona spent 12 months of her career seconded from teaching in order to develop this, and she was the workhorse that did all the interactions and all the drafting that I'm going to present to you shortly. So I think I know she feels, and myself and Claire feel, that it was a really, really valuable work that we did. And hopefully when we look back as our careers progress, it'll be one of the proudest things that we have left behind when our careers are coming to an end. So that's the importance, I think, that this framework hopefully holds. So look, I'm dividing the presentation as follows. I'm going to give you a background on the evolution of the project. I'm going to look at the development process around the framework, going to concentrate then on what it actually says, what is the content of the framework, and then the next steps, the governance of what we have produced and the implementation of what we have produced. So who commissioned this work? So there is a group that has been operating in Ireland since about 2020, which are the PAC group, the Physical Activity for People with Chronic Conditions group. And what PAC is, it is a space where health and sport and education meet. And it is not owned by any of those parties, but it is recognised that in order to drive opportunities and progress, physical activity opportunities for people with chronic conditions, there's multiple stakeholders required around the table, and PAC was the forum where that could happen. It was a collaboration involving Waterford, Carlow and Westmeath Sports Partnerships, SETU and TUS from an education point of view, and also HSE, Health and Wellbeing Division, were around the table there. And they secured funds for this work from the Dormant Accounts Fund. So the question that they posed is, how do we support exercise services and physical activity opportunity for people with chronic conditions? How do we develop exercise services and physical opportunities for people with chronic conditions? And just to say that And this is where it is a positive message that I'm giving the exercise science community. There are services in existence, and there are a lot more services in existence currently than there would have been 20 years ago, 15 or 20 years ago. We have a number of what I'm describing here as clinical exercise service providers. There are organizations like Exwell Medical, Ciel Bleu, UPMC, CRE. They're all providing in various parts of the country and around the country clinical exercise services or exercise services for people with chronic conditions. There's the patient advocacy bodies that run programs. And some of you may have seen the local sports partnerships moving into this field. And in particular, there are 7 local sports partnerships that have dedicated physical activity for health officers. And they're driving enormous progress in their areas. And they are engaging what they call tutors or exercise leaders to lead out on particular programs. So there are services, and if there are services, there are opportunities. There are opportunities for exercise science graduates either to work directly employed by various organizations or to be engaged by those organizations to deliver exercise rehabilitation or exercise physical activity opportunities for people with chronic conditions. So one part of a complex jigsaw in terms of increasing opportunities and increasing quality opportunities is the workforce. And this whole project is built around the need for a workforce. It's not for a qualification for qualification's sake. There is a recognition that all of the organizations that I've just been mentioning require a skilled workforce. And it's a workforce that is underpinned by qualifications, by training, by practice, by registration, and by further upskilling and continuous professional development. And that is what we need in this country in order to drive quality opportunities for people with chronic conditions. Not saying that the workforce is the only important thing, but it is an important part of the jigsaw, and that's what we set about looking at as part of the development of that framework, of the framework. So, what was the aim? 2 aims there. To undertake research and consultation regarding the development of quality assured accredited training for exercise professionals who will work with people who have chronic conditions. So we could have all sat around the table and come up with a qualification specification and a curriculum reasonably quickly. That wasn't the route that we decided to go on because it was actually as important, maybe even more important, to build support for this from the ground up. And building support from the ground up means going out and talking to a wide range of stakeholders about the need for this and what they would like to see in this. And it was only when that was done that then we progressed to the next stage, which was to develop the national framework, setting out occupational competencies, a detailed qualification specification and accreditation processes to guide the education and accreditation of exercise professionals in a manner that would be recognised by both the exercise and the medical fields. And we will come back to that. So that's the overall aim of the project. So there were some constraints. There were certain, there was a vision from the PAC group, the Physical Activity for Chronic Conditions group, for this qualification. So it would be pan condition. It would not focus. There are qualifications out there currently for individuals to work with one type of condition. This was going to be pan condition, cognizant of the fact that the vast majority of people with chronic conditions have more than one chronic condition. We were given the task of ensuring that there would be standalone programs, there would be standalone part-time programs that would emanate from this framework, but there would also be it would be easy to integrate it into existing undergraduate degree programs and existing undergraduate and particularly undergraduate exercise science degree programs. It was not being designed for one particular education provider. It was to be open for all of those who deliver quality education, or it was going to be accessible anyway for all of those who deliver education in the exercise science field. And it was envisioned anyway at that point, and we confirmed it as a result of our interactions, that the appropriate level would be National Framework of Qualifications level 7, but delivered in part-time sort of weekend or block delivery format to make it accessible for people who are already in the workforce and people who have full-time careers and are not able to do another 4-year degree program. So the importance of the standalone program as well as integrating it into undergraduate exercise science degree programs. Just to say that we had a project steering group that kept us to task and that gave us a bit of guidance when needed. And that ensured accountability. And as you can see from the names on the list there, very, very broad ranging, high-powered national group and with even international representation on it. And we had our own advisory panel who we went to from time to time in order to get specific advice on specific issues. So look, the framework development process, first of all. So the framework development process had 5 stages. Phase 1 was establishing the project, engaging the stakeholders, drafting the framework. Then we had a major national stakeholder symposium last May in Dublin that I will talk about, and then obviously just finalising and publishing the framework. So the first phase, establishing the framework. And the first thing we did was we looked at what was out there already. We looked at standards from the UK, we looked at standards from Europe, and we looked at standards for the sort of condition-specific qualifications, such as the BACPR and the CAN Rehab cancer qualification. So we looked at all of what was out there before we started designing something that we thought would work for Ireland. And key thing that I will keep coming back to in this presentation is we had to have a role. So every time you have a sort of a qualification and you have education linked to, for people who work in a particular space, it's critically important that you have a very, very clear concept of what that role is. And we had a clear concept and we thought we had a clear concept, but as the project progressed, we had to keep questioning what that role was and we had to keep refining our understanding of that role. And I will come back to that during this presentation because it's critically important that when you are designing education, you're saying, well, how much pathophysiology do they need and how much understanding of medications do they need? Well, then it brings you back to what actually is the role that these people will be undertaking. And there was a lot of forwards and backwards between us in relation to that question. So listen, the role was, it was going to be to deliver structured physical activity programs in community settings, in other words, outside of healthcare settings, to individuals and groups, for individuals living with a range of chronic conditions and multimorbidity, which are stable, low to moderate risk. And it was envisaged that it would be sort of personal trainers who would upskill or exercise scientists who would incorporate this as part of their degree programs or would also reskill or upskill in order to do the training to do this role. So that was what the envisaged role of these individuals was. So when I say it's to deliver structured physical activity programs, so that so primarily they were envisaged as physical activity and exercise professionals as opposed to health professionals. And so there was a lot of nuance that had to be worked out as that went along and in terms of when we started drafting the curriculum. So then we moved on to phase 2. Phase 2 was where we engaged the stakeholders. We engaged stakeholders, 130 stakeholders across a wide variety of settings, the clinical exercise service providers that exist in Ireland currently, the health stakeholder groups or national clinical programs, national representative bodies of the various professionals, the various professional groups that are part of healthcare in Ireland. There was considerable engagement with those. We needed their support. We needed the support of the medics. We needed the support of the health professionals in order to drive this project further. And some of their feedback is interesting. The local sports partnerships, the patient advocacy and representative bodies, the higher education providers, 16 higher education providers, 130 in total, a lot of groundwork, a lot of preparatory work. And look, overall, there was positive support and there was willingness to engage in this project. Can't go through all of the feedback that we got, but so when you look at the health community and what they were saying, safety and patient suitability for the types of programs that would be on offer. And then the generalist qualification. Yes, everyone were supportive of the need for a generalist as opposed to a specialist for a particular chronic condition. It was acknowledged that what we need is, people have multiple chronic conditions, and sometimes they may have a cancer diagnosis, but maybe the element that is most risky for them is not the cancer, but it might be the cardiovascular issues that they have. So the need for a generalist was paramount. In terms of the clinical exercise service providers, focus on roles and competencies. And it was supported too. The clinical exercise service providers supported the need for this role. In terms of the patient advocacy groups there and representative bodies, empathy. Now that safety, yes, but empathy also. And that's interesting in terms of, well, why do we give the instructors knowledge? For what purpose? And empathy was something that was coming back from the patient advocacy groups as to why, when you put a slant on the knowledge that you give, that the importance of empathy. So then phase 3 was drafting the framework, so the occupational role, the competencies, the qualification specification, we were asked to produce a detailed information for one chronic condition as an exemplar. We chose COPD for that. The assessment that would be required as part of that, and then the accreditation process. So there was a lot of work. I think the document is about 90 pages long. It's a lot longer than any other sets of educational standards that are out there that we're aware of from the UK or from Europe. This is a very, very detailed framework and detailed qualification specification, and I will give you the rationale for that as we go on. So that went out to online consultation, and then finally we had the major event in the Ashling Hotel last May in Dublin, where we had 95 national stakeholders across the various groups that we've just described, and roundtable session, question and answers, feedback, very hectic day. And we had 3 rounds of questioning. We asked the stakeholders in relation to the occupational role of these individuals. We wanted confirmation that we had that right. We sought feedback on the qualification itself and the content, the proposed content of that qualification. And then we looked at issues such as entry requirements. We looked at issues such as practical work experience. And actually that was a very, very, we didn't expect it, but that was deemed by the stakeholders as being particularly important. Both the quality and the quantity of the work experience that would be delivered as part of any education package that emanated from this program. Yes, so the outstanding issues that came from that I'll talk about as we go on. What constitutes low to moderate risk? We say that these people will be working with people of low to moderate risk. What does that mean? The title of the role came up for discussion. What is the appropriate title for the role? And then, as I said, the practice hours, the practical work experience that has to go with this qualification. So what we produced when we finalized the framework, we finalized, as I said, the 90-page competency, qualification and accreditation framework. We also were asked to consider other forms of training and other levels of training for people who may not wish to bite off a full qualification in this field. And we came up with, we developed specification for an awareness level training, a half-a-day training course for people who want to dip their toe in the water and just, it's not an accredited, an award of any description. It's not proposed that it goes on the National Framework of Qualifications or anything like that. It's awareness level training. And then we also produced a research report to explain the process of what we did. So moving on to the framework itself. So we have the occupational competency section, we have a very detailed qualification specification, and then we have the accreditation processes as part of this 90-page document. So when we started tearing apart the core competencies, what are the competencies of this person who is going to work with people in a physical activity setting with people who are low to moderate risk. So these were the competencies that we identified: screening, assessment, programming, delivering and monitoring, adapting and progressing, changing behavior, educating, helping the professional communicate and collaborate, exemplify professional standards, and invest in their own continuing professional development. And so okay, so look, I had in the framework itself, there is more detail on exactly what we mean by each of those. I think it is important. I suppose time would preclude us anyway going into those in any great detail, but we really reflected on what we meant by screening and what we meant by assessment of functional fitness and physical activity levels and so on. So it is important that when you develop qualification, that it's linked to an envisaged occupational role and it's linked to core competencies associated with that role. And you keep having to check what you're doing in terms of the curriculum against what you envisage the actual role of the professional will be. So we refined what we saw the role, and we titled the role. Eventually, it was considerable debate in relation to that, what the actual title of this role would be. We went, in the end, for the long-term condition exercise instructor. And this is where it gets interesting, because in the room, when we had the stakeholders, we had obviously physical activity and fitness stakeholders, we have higher education stakeholders, but we also had a lot of health stakeholders. And it is natural for one community, it's natural for the higher education community and the physical activity community to big up the role sometimes, and wanting to put titles in there such as specialist and advanced. And we went against that, because when you go to the health community, then they're saying, well, the word specialist has a very different meaning when you deal with medical professionals and advanced. So look, this is a pan-condition qualification, and there's opportunities beyond this for people to specialize in various chronic conditions with further training. So we stayed away from putting advanced or specialist or specialized in the title. This was a long-term condition exercise instructor, we felt. And I don't think any exercise science graduate should be embarrassed to have them described in this term. It's a very, very important role when you apply those skill sets that we have just talked about, those skill sets there. When you apply those skill sets in people with chronic condition, there is a high level of competence required to do that. It is certainly not, and I might be a little bit provocative from time to time as I go through the presentation. It is not beneath any exercise science graduate to consider this an appropriate role for them. It is a very, very important application of an exercise science degree, in my opinion. We were tasked with looking at the issue of risk stratification. Won't go through all of that, but that sent us back to not only what is low to moderate risk, but how do we explain that, and how do we educate a group of people in relation to what's low to moderate risk, who are not medical professionals and who are not expected to exercise fine clinical judgment. So I think we did a decent job in that, in terms of, and we have information in the appendices there in terms of that, but we also have broader explanations of what is low to moderate risk that I think should be deliverable by higher education to their students, or even in standalone programs, in broad sense, explaining the concept of low to moderate risk, which does not require in-depth medical and advanced medical knowledge. So so what we said was that the individuals who would be eligible to go on and undertake a standalone qualification in this area were people who had personal training, REPS certification, REPS Ireland certification at personal training level or equivalent. And just to remind people that personal training sits above fitness instruction, or individuals who had a BSc in sport and exercise science, those type of programs. And essentially people who had some background in human physiology, exercise programming, exercise instruction, and physical activity. So it would sit, this qualification and this education would sit on top of that preliminary education. And then that leads us to what our qualification specification and what it looks like. And look, I've highlighted for you and to prompt myself the term specification. So when you use qualification specification, it suggests something quite detailed. And it is quite detailed. What we've produced is deliberately detailed. And some of the other frameworks that we looked at the very, very initial stages of our work were not so detailed. And we felt that was a weakness in some of those frameworks, that they were open to interpretation and that one education provider could pick it up and go down a certain route and another one could go down another route with it. And you could have different graduates or you could have different awardees coming out with very different skill sets. And what we were trying to develop, we thought we got in early enough in the Irish context, we could develop something that was truly national and that where there was reasonable standardization of what this professional looks like and what their competencies are. And again, remembering what we were asked to do by some of the stakeholder groups that we engaged in relation to the safety and in relation to be able to have confidence in this role. And therefore, we feel that more detail rather than less detail. So again, being a little bit provocative, yes, sometimes higher education doesn't like to be told that they need to teach something in a high level of detail. But I would remind everybody on the call that, any of us who work in universities that deliver other programs, such as nursing or such as physiotherapy, all of those professions are guided by quite detailed guidance. And it isn't up to the individual university how they teach something or what they teach. There is obviously people can give a little bit of emphasis to their curriculum and to their modules, but we did feel that it was in the national interest and in the interest of professionals who would come out with qualifications of this nature or based on this framework, that there was a detail there and that there was a detailed specification. So look, the four core learning areas that should form part of the education of these professionals, these long-term condition exercise instructors, are Unit 1 is titled Understanding Chronic Conditions, exercise safety and professional practice when working with people with chronic conditions, exercise assessment, programming and delivery, and then supporting physical activity behavior change. Okay, won't be going into all of this, but I'm just putting those slides up as a sample of the detail that was there, where we map the knowledge and the skill related to each of those four core learning areas. So the first one there, for example, just understanding chronic conditions. So again, it makes you think, well, what level of understanding is necessary? How much pathophysiology do they need to know? How much do they need to know about medications and so on and so forth? And why do they need to know it? And going back to our core competencies and going back to all of those core competencies, so if we're saying these people will be working primarily in exercise and physical activity being the core of what they're doing, well then how much health do they need to know? How much medical knowledge do they need to know? And then we come back to some of what the patient advocacy groups were saying. Well, they need to be able to empathize. They need to understand the patient journey. They need to understand the struggles that somebody with various chronic conditions, that each chronic condition will have, that may make physical activity, that may make it, they'd have low self-confidence to engage in physical activity, and they would struggle even physiologically with fatigue or pain and so on and so forth. So, we kept coming back to the role and to the core competencies associated with the role as we tried to then put detail in the qualification specification. And there is a lot of detail in it there. We also named, and that's something that other frameworks didn't do well, we actually named the common chronic conditions that we would expect to see education for. So cardiovascular, metabolic, pulmonary, musculoskeletal, neurological, common mental health disorders. And in terms of cancer, it was cancer, yes, but it was in terms of the treatments and the side effects. And it just that's a case in point there. What do people need to know about cancer? What do physical activity and exercise professionals need to know about cancer? They need primarily to understand the treatments and the side effects associated with those treatments. So we have named the conditions that we expect to see covered in education that comes from the framework. As I said, COPD was then the exemplar condition, and there's a lot of detail there that then can be mirrored for the other conditions. So then moving on to the second core learning area, exercise safety and professional practice when working with people with chronic conditions. Yeah, it's implied in a lot of programs that there is a focus on safety and a lot of modules in higher education. But just because you have a module that says exercise for health or exercise is medicine or clinical exercise physiology, it's implied, but we knew that the stakeholders wanted to see it and wanted to see it called out. And maybe it's too easy when delivering a module of that nature to focus for people who are leading on those modules to go back to their comfort zones and to focus on the pathophysiology or the evidence and so on. That's great, but it has to be spelled out in qualifications, the safety, the red flags, the do's and don'ts. And yes, it's more training than education, but again, we shouldn't be embarrassed to do training for people who will undertake these roles as well as doing education. So what we produced at NFQ level 7, it does sit between training and education, and we don't make any apologies for that. We think it is important. And when you look at the success of some of the other programs in this field, like CAN Rehab and BACPR, there is a very much training focus on delivery and on assessment as well. And we have to learn from those who do it well. And so that was the rationale for that specific focus on safety. And it is called out as a standalone unit within the framework. Exercise assessment, programming and delivery. And what we just to summarize that, we emphasize the pan condition approach as much as possible. So we haven't gone down the route of frequency, intensity, time, and type for every chronic condition, as if they are different prescriptions. They're not. So there is an emphasis on the physical activity recommendations, both the aerobic and the resistance physical activity recommendations for people with chronic conditions, and these can be tweaked to emphasize intensity more for this chronic condition, to emphasize frequency more for this chronic condition, to emphasize strength and conditioning more for this chronic condition. But we don't present it as a separate prescription for each chronic condition, both in the interests of time and just in the interests of what is sensible, because very often when dealing with people with chronic conditions who are very, very low, if they have low levels of physical activity to begin with, it is getting them active at all becomes the initial task in any case. In terms of core learning area 4, in terms of supporting physical activity behavior change, again, a practically oriented unit. Practically oriented unit, look at it, motivational interviewing skills, looking at exercise consultation skills, and we would hope then that we would see practically oriented assessments related to that unit. Learning hours are specified. Again, the approach we took is we specified learning hours and assessments and so on for the standalone qualification, the part-time qualification that people will sign up to. A little bit more flexibility allowed for universities that are going to integrate this content into their full-time programs. In terms of quality and standardization, we have provided a sort of narrative in terms of educational guidance. We've provided recommended learning hours. We've specified methods of assessment. We've identified certain training resources, the facilities that would be required to deliver a program like that effectively, the staffing that would be required to deliver a program like this effectively. And we specified that somebody on the team has to have had experience working in practical settings with people with chronic conditions in order to drive home the sort of practical emphasis of the program. And then also issues in relation to overall program development and program management. They are all named and called out in our framework. Assessment methods are called out, MCQ, case study for a chronic condition, exercise consultation, and compulsory practical placement within the program. So, the number of hours required is small. I think it's 6 hours we have there, but it's the quality, because what we want is the program team to ensure that what the student experiences when they're out in practical settings, observing and working with people with chronic conditions, is not just send them off and get them to sign off in so many hours. We want to be able to guide them through that practical environment, and that is why some of the work placement hours are actually built into the program itself. So finally, in terms of the accreditation processes, the accreditation, it is envisaged that accreditation would be led by Reps Ireland in conjunction with ISESA, and that the task of accreditation would include having a look at somebody who steps up and says, I want to deliver a program in this field, or I want my sport and exercise science degree accredited under this framework. We would have to look at people who are out there working in the field who have a huge amount of experience and who have various legacy qualifications without sending them back to square one and starting asking them to do a new qualification. We would have to look at issues such as maintaining accreditation and what CPD and what suitable CPD people would do in order, because when you're on a professional register, it's core of being on a professional register that you do CPD in order to maintain your qualifications, the currency of your qualification. So finally, the awareness level training. The awareness level training, in terms of the learning outcomes, it was to describe in brief common chronic conditions, to summarize the benefits of physical activity, and then a little bit in terms of safety and maintaining safety and setting up programs with safety in mind. So this is a minimum of a 3-hour program, and yeah, the topic areas linked to those learning outcomes. Again, understanding the very, very basic level chronic conditions, understanding the benefits of physical activity for chronic conditions, and safety issues, and programming and setting up programs with safety in mind for people with chronic conditions. And that is designed as a minimum of a 3-hour program. That's what came back to us. That is what was seen as suitable in terms of awareness level training. That's what people were prepared to sign up for. And in order to sort of drive throughput through that type of training, we set ourselves the task of seeing what we could deliver within a sort of a half day framework. So finally, governance and implementation. Governance and implementation, we keep coming back to this area that governance and implementation needs to be placed in the broader context of what are we trying to do here. It's not just maintain a qualification, it is to develop a workforce. So in terms of all that, you have to keep that lens in mind, and in terms of what the next steps are. The next steps are, what do we need to do with this qualification and with this framework in order to develop a workforce, a skilled workforce? It is a national, so we recommended, and in our research report, we gave recommendations in terms of what the next steps were. We need a national multi-stakeholder committee with broad representations from the health and the physical activity and the sport and the education stakeholder and the clinical exercise stakeholder groups in order to drive this workforce project forward. We suggested that initially the PAC steering group that oversaw our work would be ideal to start this off, in any case, possibly with additional representation. And that's what's happening at the moment. The PAC steering group that oversaw the development of this framework is in existence, and it is monitoring rollout. It has invited other expertise onto the group. It may hand over to another national group at some point in time, but look, it is taking its responsibility seriously not to let things die a death now after the framework has been launched. So as part of our work, we give very, very detailed terms of reference to guide the steering committee to develop the workforce. Keep hammering that point. So we've specified, requirements for the need for accreditation bodies, accreditation of individual courses, accreditation of individuals, as well as based sometimes on RPL, the need for CPD, the need to monitor additional registration requirements such as first aid, the need to ensure that there is CPD and that there is follow-on specialist courses, maybe follow-on courses in cardiac or follow-on courses in cancer or follow-on courses in falls prevention and so on that would link and that would be a natural follow-on and a natural link to what we have produced as part of the PAN condition qualification. And financing. And obviously all of the rollout of all of these needs to be financed. So the national group, whoever they are or whoever they become, do need to see who can produce a little bit of money from sport, from health, from wherever, in order to sustain this going forward. So great to see that Reps Ireland and ISESA have commenced working together as accreditation partners in terms of the next steps. So I will finish on that. I will obviously, I've already thanked Brona for the work she did on this, and I will obviously acknowledge the huge input and the huge positivity that there was from multiple stakeholders, and then the work of the various stakeholders on the PAC group, which includes sport, which includes health, and which includes education. So I will finish off on that, and Carla, I will stop sharing and I will hand over to you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. I really enjoyed that presentation, and I learned a lot in terms of this new framework. So it's very exciting that what you've presented today. And I have a few questions from our audience, and just to remind some of the audience, to if you do have any further questions, put them into your Q&A or into the Q&A box, please. So the first question is, thank you for all that information. They were just wondering, what is the timeline now for bringing this framework to the implementation phase?
Well, in terms, so there are various steps that are required. So I suppose to me, one of the big issues that we need is we need education providers to step forward and say, number one, I will integrate that into my full-time programs. I will make sure that that curriculum is reflected in full-time programs. And number two, we need standalone programs. And I am aware that there are universities around the country that are doing both. And so look, and when we start to accredit part-time programs, you have to go through accreditation processes in your own university. That takes a little bit of time. So yeah, I appreciate when we started this project, people were saying we need this now. But we also need to do it right. And so we took the 12 months to put the framework in place, and now there's courses being designed based on this framework. But just to say, in terms of the registration, so literally next week, we've had a meeting already, and in terms of people who may be out there in the field already, who may be working in this area, who feel they have qualifications and work experience already that may allow them to register and to become sort of registered professionals as a long-term conditions exercise instructor, that can start already. So it's going to be done. The various elements of the way forward will be implemented bit by bit. So some of it is kicking off already, Carla.
Okay. And is it a matter of the people involved in the framework that they're reaching out to, let's say, for example, higher education institutions, or, you know, how does it work if they want to become involved in integrating this framework into their programs?
So we weren't at ground zero in Ireland before this in terms of education. Reps Ireland had a number of education providers, all higher education providers, who delivered another standard, who delivered education based on another standard. I think it probably had 5 or 6 providers that delivered that education. They have all agreed to change what they do, you know, marginally in terms of dealing with the emphasis that this new framework will have. So they've already commenced that process. And as I said, there are others developing standalone programs. If any guidance is needed, and if somebody wants to reach out and have a conversation about that and wants to understand the implications for their own program, and if it's possible to do it on their own program, I would recommend that they contact Alan Malone in Reps Ireland. in terms of he might talk them through the accreditation process that will follow there as the way forward.
Okay, that's really useful. Thanks very much for that, Michael. Is there buy-in going forward from all of the stakeholders in the framework?
There certainly was buy-in when we did it. Yes, is the honest answer. Like I attended a session in December up in terms of sort of falls prevention, and there would have been physios at that. There would have been other health services, and they were basically just saying, when can we get this people qualified to this specification? I believe there's very strong buy-in for it.
Okay, that's super. Another question from our audience. How will successfully accredited professionals maintain their accreditation, or has that been thought out yet?
Yeah, I suppose they're the type of issues we are, again, as I said, we are not starting from ground zero. There was in terms of the approach that Reps Ireland take with all their registrations and all their categories that they have on their register, there is a requirement to do CPD. But I think what's important for this one is that it's suitable CPD. And we have to ensure that there are opportunities for suitable CPD, so that it is CPD that is specific to people with chronic conditions, as opposed to just going off and doing I won't name it, but just something that is of relevance to the general public from an exercise point of view. This has to be so, and so that beholds us all. And in terms of where exercise science, and I think this is where sort of ISESA members who have the expertise, and if you think of what everybody brings to the table in ensuring that this is a successful rollout, what ISESA members bring to the table is expertise. And in terms of putting on the table CPD offerings and say, I'll run a one-day course in this. That's what we need, as well as them sort of integrating it into degree programs. We need CPD, and then once it's a sort of a chicken and egg, it's hard to enforce CPD requirements until there are suitable CPD opportunities there.
Yeah, with the resources. And that was actually leading on to a question is, how do you see how the ISA can contribute or align to this framework, or maybe vice versa? And it's perhaps around that CPD, but is there anything else?
Yeah, it's the accreditation. So we have sort of there's an accreditation committee that will operate between both, and that has been effectively set up. We may add one more member to it. So the accreditation and the promotion and just encouraging. I think we have to make a little bit of a leap in sport and exercise science education, speaking with a sport and exercise science education hat on myself, obviously, in terms of agreeing that there is a requirement for us all to sign up to common curriculums in order to standardize what we do and in order to be advanced our graduates. Because when you look at, I think there has been a lot of independence. People teach to their strengths, they teach to their interests. Because we don't have professional bodies requiring us to teach a very detailed curriculum. I think it is in the interest of our graduates that we do agree common skill sets, not only in the exercise for chronic conditions, but in the sports science, and in various other domains of sport and exercise science education. I think there is reward there in terms of being able to promote our graduates if we can be very, very clear what they're able to do in terms of core competencies.
Excellent suggestion. Next question, are patients referred by a GP, or is it envisaged that a program could be advertised locally by a health officer and people simply present themselves?
Yeah, so we got a lot of these type of questions. And Brona, in fairness to her, she had some patience to deal with all of this type of questions. And the answer back is, we're designing a qualification specification, we're not designing the program. Now, I'll just go a little bit further there. So all of I mentioned a number of clinical exercise service providers and the physical activity for health officers that are setting up programs around the country. And they all have different ways of onboarding participants onto those programs. Some of them are what we would call strictly referral, as in it's a referral from one medical professional to another medical professional, and there's medical oversight of these programs. In some cases, it's signposting or recommending that a patient engages. And in some cases, there's what we would have called self-referral, where people just show up and whoever's running the program has to try and deal with the safety elements of that. So what we've tried to do is we have tried to give this role, and we were we did understand that people who would have this qualification would work with different providers under different onboarding and medical management arrangements. But there was still enough commonality between all of those programs that they would benefit from the expertise that we were trying to create. So in answer to that's a long-winded way of saying, Carla, it wasn't up to us to design a national referral program, but it was up to us to sort of try and give a specification for professionals who would have the skill set to work across those programs. And we think we've done a reasonably good job in doing that.
Yep. Okay, super. You may know, Michael, I'm a biomechanist, and I see that through the core competencies is very much physiology focused for obvious reasons, you might say. But I suppose it would be remiss of me to say or to ask a question around what you feel the contribution around that kind of movement, mobility aspect, particularly around the chronic conditions and where that might be embedded within the framework.
Yeah. It's a good question, Carla. Now, just to say, there is a strong behaviour change element to that as well. And there are practical skills associated with the behaviour change. We certainly would not be possible to deliver education without doing the behaviour change element properly. It is in no case is it read this chapter and there'll be one or two questions in the test on it. That wouldn't fly. Look, a good question in terms of biomechanics and movement. One of the areas, going back, as I didn't have enough time to go into the whole concept of low to moderate risk. But in terms of risk and in terms of, if you take the two big risks that we're focusing on, you're talking about cardiac events and you're talking about falls. And there is certainly scope in the area of falls prevention and gait to look at movement there. And in terms of even defining low to moderate risk, one of the criteria that we had in there was sort of low functional ability and poor movement qualities increase the risk, regardless of the chronic condition that we're looking at. Sometimes it's not always about the chronic condition. The risk doesn't always just relate to the condition. It relates to the functional and the movement ability of the participant on a program. So there's a little bit in there, Carla. There's certainly some in there.
Yeah, it's hidden. It's slightly hidden. Okay. That's terrific. Michael, that's all our questions. So really appreciate the time and the detail that you've gone in terms of provided with the framework, but also just the amount of work that you and your contributors have invested and all the stakeholders in coming to this stage, and we look forward to seeing how it rolls out in the future. And I also am really looking forward to meeting you in person and at SETU in the 22nd of May. So that's another plug for our conference. Just a reminder as well, our next webinar is on the 17th of April, where Dr. Joe Warren will be returning for his part 2 webinar in terms of solutions in relation to rigor, research quality, methodologies, and so on. So get that date into your diary. And as ever, check out excuse me, our fantastic podcasts through Apple and Spotify, and our blogs on our social media posts, and also check out our website www.isesa.ie. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us during your lunchtime slot. I hope that you find this session as useful as I have and as interesting as I have. And remember, get your conference ticket booked once you leave this session. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.